And welcome back to another episode of the Digitise Diaries. This is season 2. This is episode 2. And once again, I'm joined by my fantastic co host, Barry Cummins. We're going to be talking all things digital transformation in this podcast. And this is our first live podcast in a little bit of a while. We normally do LinkedIn audio events. Sometimes we do pre-records, but today we thought let's mix it up a little bit and let's broadcast live on LinkedIn. Let's go out live on YouTube and let's go out live on Facebook and see who can we get to join the conversation. But before we kick into what we're going to talk about today, I'm just going to hand over to my co-host Barry for a brief introduction. Barry, good morning.
Good morning or good afternoon for where I am. Just got into the afternoon over here in sunny UAE, where the weather's just getting lovely that we can go back outside again. But very much looking forward to having this conversation, especially after the last week and a half, really, where you and I have both had a very, very busy time focusing on the digital safety work that we do for children, students, young people, and parents, where our core focus is around the safe use of a lot of the tools, the digitization, the digital tools, the social platforms, and of course the topic on everybody's lips at this moment in time, which is artificial intelligence. And so it's been a super busy time for us, even preparing for that week. I know that you've been in and out of schools and delivering 4 or 5 sessions a day, myself doing the same thing over here in the UAE. But it's been really, really interesting to see the attendance, especially from parents, and the nature of the questions coming from them now as it pertains to the digital space. So I'm very much looking forward to our chat today. It's always good to get on these with you, Wayne. Like I say, it's been a while. Every time we do them, I'm like, yeah, afterwards, I think that was enjoyable. I really enjoyed that. So looking forward to the conversation.
And of course, Barry, let's rewind a little bit. If it wasn't for technology, you and I would probably never have met. And if we cast our mind back to all those years ago, when I was making a trip over to the UAE and I put a post out on Twitter, a tweet, and I said, I'm going to be in Dubai for the next couple of days. Does anybody want to meet up for a coffee? And
Yeah,
little did we know.
exactly. Little did we know, and that was it. You sent that tweet from the hotel that you were in, and as luck would have it, that I could see that hotel from my office. I saw the tweet come in, and I sort of said, "I think I can see you, Wayne. I'll be over in a minute," and came over for that coffee. And like you say, I don't know how many years ago was that now. That's got to be getting close to 10, nearly.
I
There or
think it's beyond.
thereabouts.
I think it's beyond 10.
Is it? Oh. It's been a journey since then, but as you said, such a good story to be able to tell, because both of us are massive advocates of the potential behind the technology, behind optimization of these tools, behind streamlining processes and whatnot, because this is what the technology allows us to do. And us coming together at that point through technology is a great, origin story from that side of things. And then what we've done over the last decade and a bit in terms of the learning, the building, the mistakes that we've made, and then where we are today in terms of what we do with the cyber safety work, but also how that evolved into what Cobabble is, in terms of the platform, our technology platform, which we built initially for parents. That's something that sometimes we forget to mention, is that we built Cobabble to be this delivery platform to keep mums and dads up to date with the ever-changing digital world, to try and give them a chance, really. And it was this last week, the questions coming saying, how do I find the time as a mum or a dad to learn about all of this stuff, because the kids are running away with it, and myself and you, we go in and talk to mums and dads to make them aware. The awareness goes up, and then the question comes, well, I'm a bit scared, to say the least, but how do I go forwards? And that's where Cobabble was originally developed, to help fill that gap. And then of course the world stopped and COVID came, and we shifted it into another angle around the business to business optimization platform. And that's just one of our many threads in our conversation. But I think it's also very important just to really emphasize, and I do this when I talk to the students, is I say that I'm standing here in front of you as a massive advocate of technology, and these are all the things that myself and my business partners have done with the same technology that's available to you guys. It's just about how we focus in on it and really identify the opportunities from the risks.
And that's really important that we consider those risks and those dangers. And in previous episodes of the podcast, Barry, particularly in season one, we talked a lot about some fantastic examples that are happening in different parts of the world. So if people haven't listened into season one of the podcast, do go back and check out some of those previous episodes. There's some fantastic discussions around a lot of the benefits that take place when it comes to implementing technology into your company or your organization. And you highlighted it there a couple of moments ago. One of our reasons for creating CoBabble as a platform was to empower parents to get access to the latest information, to keep yourself up to date as a parent. And there's a huge onus now on parents to make sure they're aware of the platforms that their children and young people are using, but also how they can get involved in their child's digital world and how they can help learn together as a family safe ways to use these platforms, responsible ways to use these platforms. So that kind of dovetails very nicely into what we're going to talk about today from the perspective of safety by design. So when these platforms are being created, particularly when we think of digital transformation, when we think of new technologies that are being deployed within businesses and organizations, how can we really make sure as a provider of the technology, potentially somebody who is purchasing the technology, that it's going to be safe? And
Yeah.
this term safety by design now has been bounced around quite a lot, but I often wonder, is it actually being considered in the development life cycle?
Yeah, and I think this is a really interesting topic because when you look at how the platforms make their money, safety is not at the top of their mind. We can categorically say that it sort of doesn't even figure in there. And we had this conversation with a couple of parents this last week to say they're not going to change soon, in spite of the campaigning, in spite of the really brilliant work that's happening down in Australia with the e-safety commission to really push this through at the government level to say, look, if these guys are going to design these platforms, then we really should be holding them to account that they're developing them with safety in mind first, as opposed to dollars in mind, and then trying to work backwards to think, oh, yeah, actually, we've got a lot of young people using this platform. Maybe we should put some safety parameters in there. And you look at even some of the bigger platforms now where they put some more parental controls into the settings, and you think, well done, but shouldn't have that been like primary? Shouldn't have that been in place when you launched it a decade ago or 15 years ago, that this would be in mind? And I think, to answer your question, it's definitely not safety by design at this point in time, which is why the onus falls on us as mums and dads and caregivers and aunties, uncles, anyone that has a young person in their life they care about, to upskill ourselves whilst also campaigning for these big providers of the platforms to do a little bit more, not a little, do a lot more when it comes to safety. But that's a slow burn. We used to use the example way back when in sales of a massive ship trying to change course. It takes ages. They have to start planning to turn left or turn right miles and miles and miles before they want to do it. And that's definitely the case here, that these behemoths of companies are not agile enough to change quickly, which means we have to do it as individuals. And that's where this this focus on understanding what is actually out there, technology wise, where are our children spending time, and what can we do as parents to catch up, because the reality is we're long way behind. And so we've got a number of different roles to play there as parents, and one of them is finding the time to upskill ourselves, and that's where a lot of us are finding issues, because where do we find that time?
Yeah, and that's, I suppose, again, going back to one of the reasons why we initially developed CoBabble as that vehicle for parents to be able to get access to the content that we're creating on an ongoing basis. Really, how to keep yourself up to date with what some of these apps are, but not only that, how to go in and set up those all important parental controls, avail of content filtering, those things that are really important for all families to know about when it comes to online safety. And a couple of moments ago, you mentioned the e-safety commissioner in Australia and the great work being done. And in Ireland now, we just have an e-safety commissioner appointed, which is fantastic. So it's going to be
Yeah.
interesting to see what that new individual office will do for online safety here across the island of Ireland, but also how that particular office will link into work being done in other parts of the world. And going back to the e-safety commissioner in Australia for a moment, the first reports of children using AI to bully their peers using sexually explicit generated images has now been flagged up. And this was an announcement from the e-safety commissioner on ABC News back in August of this year. So we're already starting to see, Barry, the technology potentially being used inappropriately. Although we talk about all the positives of the technology in season one, we're now starting to see some of the ramifications and the dangers as a result of it being misused, particularly where children and young people are concerned.
Absolutely, Wayne, and that's a big part of the problem because we're releasing this technology and having it out there for all and sundry to use, and of course, anyone that thinks they're going to put something like ChatGPT out there and children are just going to go, not for us, and ignore it is living under a rock because of course, as soon as these come out, our kids are looking at it and go, whoa. That is amazing. That is cool. And hey, hang on a minute. I could use this to, and just list. They could use it to do so many things. But of course, the tween or the teen brain goes to, what could I do with this? What trouble could I make? And of course, they're finding ways to do this. And like you said, they're using it to create some very inappropriate pictures, visuals, using it, and this is the bit that always interests me because then they sit there and say, it wasn't me. I didn't do that. And you say, okay, yeah, you didn't actually draw that and do that, but you gave the prompt to the technology to do it. So there is responsibility there. But it comes back to this idea of safety by design is shouldn't we have put some of these parameters in place and these rules of engagement, as it were, before we released it all out there and let everybody have a go with it, allow young people to access it, and now we're chastising them and punishing them for using it in a way that in business we use it every day. We jump on ChatGPT, use it for research, use it to acquire and curate information. We're using it to help create content, both copy and visual. We're using it for all of the reasons that some of our children are, but then not allowing them to because of their naivety. They're using it for some of the negative stuff. And this is where, in a way, it's not fair for them because we're saying, hey, look at this amazing shiny tool, but hang on. No, don't use it. I'll use it, but you can't use it. And this is not how the technology works. It's not how the internet works. It's not how the platforms work. If you put it out there, children are going to get hold of it, and they're probably going to get hold of it before we as parents get hold of it. And so then again, we're already behind the curve because they're on it. They know how to prompt, they know how to get it to do certain things, they know how to make it look like it wasn't them. They know all the cheats and hacks before we're even aware it's out there in some cases. And this is where I do believe there has to be this approach of safety by design so that there are some bits of peace of mind as a parent that, okay, it's out there, but somebody has actually thought about this before they put it out there and put something in place to protect those that are perhaps too young to be using it. But that also then is the catalyst for us to say, as mums and dads, we really got to get on this faster because us relying on them to put these safety measures in place, as we've seen and we're testament to, it doesn't happen.
And that's again why that education piece, Barry, is so important. It's about not avoiding having these conversations. And although, from a parent's perspective, sometimes parents feel overwhelmed. Gosh, I don't know anything about that new piece of technology. My kids are streets ahead of me. But as I always say to parents, really, when it comes to online safety, it's about the ABCs. There's always going to be new platforms. There's always going to be new apps, and you're never ever going to be all over these apps. Like even I struggle keeping myself up to date with the latest app. I mean, I go into schools and you go into schools all the time, and you always have some student that comes up to you at the end and goes, "Have you heard about this?" or "Did you know about that?" And you're like, "Huh, no, I didn't know about that." And it's like, this is sometimes primary school children that are coming up and telling me ways to get around certain things and how they've figured out how a particular app can be used. So I try to get parents, and I know you try to get parents to think about really managing the access in the home, setting the boundaries and having those conversations, which are really important. And that's where keeping yourself up to date when it comes to, what's out there, what's coming down the tracks. You don't need to be an expert in it all, of course, but you just need to understand a little bit about how it's maybe being used.
Definitely, and one of the things that I leave with parents when I talk to them is this idea of just setting yourself up to be alerted to this. Like, so you don't have to be an expert in it, but you can leverage the technology. Even something as simple as a Google alert can be used so that you, as a mum or a dad, get to hear about it at about the same time as our children are going to hear about it. We get an opportunity to upskill ourselves, or at least be aware that there's a new platform. And I'm last week with parents, I said, who's heard of ChatGPT? They all put their hands up. Yeah, everybody's heard of that. And then I've got a slide filled of all the other ones that you say, well, how many of these have you heard of? And they're like, uh, none. I say, yeah, so exactly. So we all know about ChatGPT. We all say to our children, right, you can't use this, or you're not allowed to use this, and these are the parameters for it. So they say, okay, I won't use ChatGPT, and they just go and use another one. And they turn around and say, you told me not to use ChatGPT. I haven't used ChatGPT. I've gone on to Dolly. I've gone on to Midjourney. I've gone on to all of the other ones where they can get the same kind of information that we don't know about. And we then realize, okay, we need to be very specific when we're talking to our children about what to use and where to use it and what's allowed.
And there's also something really important in what you're saying there as well, Barry, because platforms like ChatGPT, whilst they haven't been around that long, they've been around for a while. So they
Mm.
have implemented refinements, they have improved problems and issues that their platform is responsible for. Yes, they've got more work to do, but it's more of the unknown platforms that I often have a concern about, that maybe they don't have the trust and safety teams in behind it. They don't have the investment in behind it. And they're just putting these platforms out into the ether with no safety in place. And that's the bigger concern as well. That, again, that's why those conversations are really important. Look, we know, or I know as a mom or a dad, that you're going to be coming across these platforms. In fact, you might even be using AI within Snapchat, because Snapchat has the My AI chatbot now for the past number of months. It's just rolled out a new feature called Dreams, which is all based around generative AI. So, popular social media apps that children and young people are using, AI is already a huge part of that now.
Absolutely, and this was a big part of the question. Sorry, the conversation that we've been having with parents is to say it's. I likened it to when social media came on the scene, 15 years ago, and everyone's, not everyone, but a lot of people, like, it's a fad, it'll pass, this isn't going to last, and here we are. And at that point, I say to parents, how many of us have got a problem with social media? How many of us cannot put it down? How many of us are doom scrolling on Instagram for hours on end when the kids have gone to bed? And if we're honest with ourselves, most of us put our hands up and say, yeah, I do, and I'm supposedly a grown up and an adult, and I know what I'm doing, and I get lost in this stuff. So we have to have some realistic expectations of our children when it comes to this, because it's here. It's not coming, it's here. It's been out there, like you say, for a little while. The ones that have been around, like ChatGPT, for a little while, have got some parameters in place, but then there's a whole raft of other channels and platforms which are part of the race, if you like. As soon as this was made aware to the general public, every developer out there was like, right, well, what can we build? And how can we build a platform that uses AI? And my social feeds are just full of adverts for all of these different business tools now, where you've got 100 prompts for this and 100 this, and use this for that, and it's going to streamline everything. And some of them are great. Don't get me wrong. Some of them have some really cool functionality and do help with our processes and streamlining. But there's some that you think, yeah, that one just, there's something not quite right about that. And that's evaluating it from a technical perspective as an adult. But as a child, they look at it and go, oh, it does this, sounds cool, I'm in. And off they go, and not realizing what they're doing, how they're doing it, what they're sharing in order to get that accessibility as well, and how much information and data they're providing about themselves when they use some of these platforms that have zero safety by design built in. And that's really the worry for us, to understand that the technology is there, and we're behind the curve again. And it sucks, as parents, because maybe some people out there have just got their head around the whole digital space. And okay, I know some of the not so common platforms and applications where my children are spending time, and I can have those conversations. And now AI stuck its head in, and I'm back to square one. It's like, okay, well, now where and how do I do that? But that's a big part of what we do to try and allay those fears, and also just say, here's a direction to go in.
And we are the first generation of parents having to deal with this. I mean, my mum and dad didn't have the social media thing bolted on to their overall parenting life. Now
Yeah.
us, yeah, their parent journey. Now us parents have to sort of try and figure this out as best we can, but continue to have those conversations. But let's take a moment just to welcome everybody along today who's maybe watching the podcast live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and indeed on Facebook. If you've got any questions that you would like to ask, please feel free to pop the questions in. We'll pick those questions up as we move through our live conversation today. If you're picking this up on the replay, you're very welcome. Thank you for tuning in to the Digitise Diaries. This is season 2, episode 2. My name is Wayne Darren. Of course, I'm joined by my co-host, Barry Cummins. And if you've got an idea on something you would like us to cover on the podcast, or you'd like to come on as a guest in one of our upcoming episodes, please do reach out and get in touch. This is a safe place to have conversations about the Digitise process and how it can impact you, your family, and indeed your business. But let's flick back, Barry, and let's talk about some of the more negative, more serious issues around AI, particularly an article that I came across recently in the Telegraph just in September of this year, where AI generated naked images of dozens of Spanish girls were shared around schools. Now, the police in Spain are investigating deep fakes in a town that's targeted victims aged 11 to 17 years of age. Now, this really moves into the whole area of technology-assisted harm, which is an area that I do talk to parents about, making them aware of really what technology-assisted harm is and how the technology itself can be used to cause harm.
Yeah, definitely. And like we work together on these, and the technology assisted harm angle is something that we really spend a bit of time on with mums and dads, because in this conversation, we have to talk about very uncomfortable scenario that's happening with sexual abuse imagery that's being created, and that the whole labeling of that had to change not so long ago to self-generated, because a lot of young children were creating these pictures. They were taking nudes and they were sharing them and they were putting them out there, and so the conversation has been around that for a little while. But with the advent of AI, we now have to take that conversation to the next level, because a lot of young people and children, they understand the danger of doing it themselves, of taking that image, taking that video, sending it to someone they don't know, and then the repercussions of that. But now we're in a situation where we as parents could be looking at a picture that's been brought to our attention, and it looks like our child. And it actually could be our child, because it's their face, it's their body shape, and it's a picture of, that is them when we went on holiday to France. And yet somehow they're naked. And you think, okay, why have they done that? And in the back of our mind, we're also thinking, but they didn't do that because we were all there as a family. I remember that taking that picture. And this is where AI is coming, because there's tools out there. There's one that's called drawnudes.io, and another one which is the clothoff.io. And these are now AIs that will take any picture you like, fully clothed, you upload it into the AI, it removes the clothes. And so now we've got this issue where our children do understand the dangers of creating this kind of imagery. They're not doing it, and yet somehow AI, there is a picture of them that apparently is them with no clothes on, that has been circulated either to strangers on the internet or in the WhatsApp group at school. And now they're having to deal with the fallout of that in terms of that image, but also trying to have the conversation with mom and dad to say, I didn't do that. I did not create that. I understand the dangers of this, and I did not do that. But to a parent who is with their own eyes looking at this going, that looks like you, and wanting to believe them, but saying there's physical evidence here to suggest that you might be lying to me. And it is one heck of a conundrum for us to be living in. But this is that awareness piece as well, to understand that this is a potential situation we might find ourselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where that education remains so important, and those conversations remain equally important, so that there's a dialogue between mum and dad and the young person, or indeed the children, around the technology. And we have these open conversations. Like, you and I understand that sometimes these conversations are difficult to have, particularly when you're talking about pornography, you're talking about inappropriate content, you're talking about toxic online behavior, which happens online. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of very good role models for children and young people online, particularly teenage boys. There's a lot of content, and I'm a parent of two teenage boys myself. I'm aware of the content that's on social media platforms, apps like TikTok, Instagram, that my teens are seeing, which is influencing them potentially one way or the other. And we frequently have that conversation in my house about, not everything you see online is real, particularly around relationships, consent, boundaries. We have to be having those conversations as mums and dads. And in fact, I think the earlier we have the conversations, the better.
And I was about to say that that is perhaps the crux of this, is that they are uncomfortable conversations. They're conversations that we, as you know, people looking back at our childhood, could probably never imagine having these conversations with our parents at any age. Even now, some of us are probably thinking, I don't want to talk about that with my parents. But the reality of the world is, we're living in this digital world, and that if we don't talk to our children about these subjects, TikTok will, Snapchat will, YouTube will, their peers will. So they are going to hear about this. And the way that I look at this is to say, well, okay, well, then I would like to try and at least frame these subjects in the way that I'm raising my children, so that they can have some context of how this goes together. And as you do with your two guys, that you have these conversations regularly. And I get asked this question: how often should I talk to my children about the digital world, AI, online safety? And my answer to that question is always, how often do they go online? And, well, every day for multiple hours. So there's your answer. This is how often we need to be talking about this, because we might talk about it last month, and in a month a lot changes and a lot happens, and a lot moves around in the digital space, that we want to have these conversations as regularly as possible, to just remind them. Because I do remember being a teenager, and what my parents said went in one and out the other. And okay, yeah, whatever, yeah, mum and dad, I hear you. And I do this with my little ones. I've got two boys as well. I say, what did I just say? And they're like, I don't know. They're not listening. And so it's saying, okay, how do I talk with them in a language where it does go in? And that language has got to be a digital one. It's around what they're interested in, whether they're online playing games, whether they're in the social world, whatever it is they're doing. We've got to talk to them in the language that goes in, and they go, oh, okay, well, now that you've put it in the framework of Minecraft, it's kind of stuck in there a little bit, that message of strangers on the chat and all this kind of stuff. But it's in a framework that they are interested in. And I suppose that's the key bit to this, is to say, we can't just stand there and talk to them as parents, saying, don't do this and don't do that, and this is dangerous and that's dangerous, because that does go in one ear and come out the other. But if we put it into context of something they're interested in, then maybe some of that messaging comes through. But in order to do that, to your point earlier, we have to be informed enough to have that conversation in the first place.
We have to absolutely lean into it. We can't lean away from it. And you were saying whenever you were a teenager there, I remember back in my days of a teenager, the phone was probably the most advanced piece of technology that was in my house
Yeah.
back then. And I'm talking sort of mid 90s here. Not everybody had a phone, but I remember we got a phone into the house. And I can often remember my friend who lived maybe around the corner from where I lived, and he would phone me, let's say on a Thursday night, and we'd be making plans about going to the teenage disco on the Friday night. So Paul would phone me, and my bedroom was in the attic. I would come down the stairs, I would pick up the phone, and I'd be having a conversation with Paul. Now, I was probably about 14, 15 around this time. And I can always remember we had a second phone in the kitchen, and you would hear the phone lifting up in the kitchen, and my mum or dad listening into the conversation to see what was being said. And I always tell that example to parents, and everybody gets a real good giggle out of it, because I said that was the type of parental controls that my mum and dad used whenever the phone was the new piece of technology
Yeah.
in my house. And I said, the technology is here, it's not going away, but the parental controls are so important for you to
Mm.
utilize, because what it does is it gives you a little bit of visibility potentially on what's happening on the platform, who the young person is connected to, who they might be messaging. And you can then use that as an opportunity to have a conversation, particularly if you see an account that maybe you're not familiar with, or maybe they're messaging in a particular account quite frequently. These are all opportunities for you to have the conversations. And parents will say to me all the time, but Wayne, how do I get these parental controls set up? They're not going to want them on the device. And I'd said, look, you have to understand that you're buying the technology. You're paying for the technology. Make
Yeah.
this part of the acceptable use policy, and do this from the outset. Yes, it becomes more difficult when they get older, granted, but when you've got 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, and 13-year-olds, you want to be utilizing those parental controls for as early as possible, and setting those all important boundaries, because they really do help.
Absolutely. And I think that what that also comes back to is this open communication from as young an age as possible. Because if we do put this into place for those of us that have maybe 6 year olds, 5 year olds, 4 year olds, I've got a 6 year old who last year he thought he was going to get an iPad for Christmas. And he was, I told him outright, I said, that's not going to happen, my friend. That's not going to happen for quite a while for you, unfortunately, because they'll push and they want these things. But it's then about having these open conversations with them at this age where some of the things they don't fully understand, but it's almost we have this safe space to talk about these subjects, and there are limitations. They don't have their own screens, and we have an iPad in the house. It's a really really old one that doesn't really support a whole lot, but we can have music on it, and so they can put the music on and put that through the speaker, so they have access to that, but it's not connected to the net. It's, none of this kind of stuff. But these conversations are happening from a very young age, so that when we do get to those tween and teen years where they don't want to listen at all, they're pushing away naturally as well from mum and dad, that some of these things are already set in stone, which is great if you have the luxury of having young ones and we've got to get there. But if we're in the middle of it right now with tweens and teens, then it's also about implementing some of these things to help us. And this is what I always say to parents, is that we can leverage the very same technology that our children are using to help us parent in this world. First of all, by getting on it and utilizing it, but secondly, by understanding that there are parental control software out there that will help us to. And some parents say, well, that seems like not giving them their privacy, and they're going to argue against this, and say, yeah, they're going to argue against it, just like we argued against not being allowed out after 9 o'clock when I was 14 years old. But guess what? At 9 o'clock, I was home, because that's the parenting side of things, and it's about implementing these things. And unfortunately, we're going to have to deal with the tantrums and the screaming and the I hate yous and all of this kind of stuff. But from my perspective, and I know from yours as well, is that the safety of our young people in the digital space, it trumps all of that. And our role as a parent is to not make them happy all the time. And again, in my opinion, it's about keeping them as safe as possible as much of the time. And today that means whilst they're on a screen doing stuff that we don't necessarily know or understand, but we can put some technology in place to give us those hot spots, not just a big brother watch them all the time, because we don't have time for that either. And this is something that I say to the students, mum and dad don't want to watch you all the time whilst you're doing this stuff. We want to give you the freedom and the ability to to empower yourself to go and do stuff and fix the problems that you create. But at the same time, some of the problems that you might get yourself into, you're not physiologically capable of solving. At that point, maybe mum and dad can help, even if it's just by listening. But maybe we can leverage the technology to give us a clue that, okay, my son's gone online and done something or said something or is searching for something, and that's a bit of a red flag for me in our family. Let's sit down and try and discuss this. And again, this comes back to your point of, yes, a lot of parents will say, I'd love to do that with my son and daughter, but they won't sit down and talk with me. And it's okay, understand that. Then we have to start from today to put those parameters in place to create that safe space where that they can talk to us. And this is what I say to parents as well. I say the 1 hour for dinner, no punishment, no judgment. And a lot of children go, this is a trap. Mum and dad are saying there's going to be no repercussions, but there's definitely going to be repercussions. But actually, if we're true to our word and we keep that in place and we let them talk about things, they talk about small things to begin with, and you think, okay, but they're just judging our reaction, and then they talk about something else, and then they might tell us something that they know they shouldn't have done. And again, if we're able to then give them the truth of, this is a no judgment, no punishment space, I'm really glad that you told me that, and let it go. And they go, okay. And the trust builds, and it takes time. This is, I think, the other thing that we have to realize as mums and dads: there is no quick fix to this. Whatever age our children are, there is no quick fix. It's about putting the work in, putting in the parameters, and this is really important, that the safe space, allowing them to talk to us without then punishing them, judging them, or doing the other thing that we do as parents, which is jump in and try to fix it, because sometimes they don't want that. They want to tell us about it. They don't want us to try and fix it. And as parents, we also don't want to jump in and fix it all the time, because we can't be there all the time. And actually, we want to empower them to think about how they can approach some of these subjects themselves. And finding this heady mix of everything there is the juggling act that we have to get better at as parents. But it is about using the technology, open communication channels, and finding a way to fit it into our family, because we're all different as well. We're all raising our children in different ways, and there isn't a one size fits all, but there's bits that we can take from each and say, okay, this is how I think we can do it in our family, where we embrace the technology. And I think this is really important. Embrace it, leverage it for good, but also keep our children as safe as possible.
And really leads back to our whole topic today about the creators of the platforms, the developers of the platforms. Many of these creators themselves are parents. They've got young children. We've already seen some previous executives from very, very well-known social media platforms coming out and said, I wish that I had done this differently. And I think it's okay saying that, and it's okay creating a Netflix documentary on it. And, having these thoughts when the ship has sailed. But really what I think we need to be doing when it comes to any technology that we are developing, we really need to be learning from what's come before it. This isn't the new space when it comes to technology. Social media apps and platforms, the internet now has been around for well over 20 years. We've social media platforms now that are well mature and have well documented harms which have taken place on their platform. I think there's an opportunity for more transparency and more collaboration, particularly in the technology space as a whole, and really stop focusing on the dollars, about generating the advertising revenue. Look, we run businesses. Of course, you need to generate revenue. Of course, you need to, be moving forward. But at the same point, at what cost? And I think that's something that I know you and I would be calling for, to make sure that we are thinking about safety by design as a central component for whatever is being developed, and we keep children and young people at the center of that.
100%. Yeah, I think that's a great way to summarize that. And I couldn't agree more. It's just about how we can do this from the outset. And as you said, I just want to really double down on that. We both run businesses, multiple businesses. We understand the commercial side of things when it comes to that. But there's got to be a balance. How many dollars is enough dollars? You ask anybody that's successful, they say, well, as many as you can get, right? But at what cost? And what cost to our children, to our soul, if you believe in that kind of thing, in terms of there's got to be a line drawn in the sand, and that the people creating these platforms say, yeah, that's the line, we're not crossing it. Doesn't matter for how many dollars. There's got to be the ethical side of things to protect young people who, I use these words, trusting and naive. Children are by nature trusting and naive, and I want my children to stay that way for as long as possible. When they gain access to some of these platforms, that goes out the window, and we need to do as much as possible to preserve that, I think. And if the platforms were looking at it from that angle, then we'd be onto the right approach to it. Whether that happens in the near future, I don't know, but we can work towards it, right?
Well, we have online safety bills now coming into law here in the UK. It's going to be interesting to see what the Online Safety Commissioner does here in Ireland. It's going to be interesting to continue to follow what the E-Safety Commissioner is doing in Australia. So we are seeing movement. We are seeing developments. It's a slow process. It's a frustrating process. But as you said a couple of moments ago, we want to make sure that our children are having as safe of experience as possible online. And that really is fundamental to you and I. And I know a lot of other people out there around the world that are doing great work. Look, Barry, it's been another fantastic conversation today. As always, these conversations are enlightening, are informing, and are also inspiring as well. So if you're somebody who's listening in to the Digitise Diaries podcast, this is season 2. This has been episode 2. And if you'd like to join the conversation, please feel free to reach out and get in touch. Barry, we're always looking for guests.
Absolutely. I think this is very important for us to stress every time, is that we have our opinions on this. We have a certain amount of experience, but we'd love to hear other people's opinions and get their insight to the experience of what they've gone through and whatnot, because I think that's also a big part of this. Is about sharing. You mentioned it right at the beginning. It's supposed to be a safe space where any question is askable, and actually the discourse around that is usually the insight where we go. You and I come away from it going, huh. Yeah, I learned quite a lot from that, and that's, both of us are also learners. We want to learn, and so other people's experience, I think, is the best way to learn. So please do get in contact, drop us a line if you want to come on to one of the episodes and have a conversation in person. We'd love to do that as well. We're an open book, an open door. We'd love to have you join us.
And of course, we're back each and every episode. We do a live, we do a LinkedIn audio rooms, or indeed we do a pre-record podcast. So there's lots of different ways that you can join the Digitise Diaries. And if you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please do us a massive favor and hit that share button. Make sure you subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, or whatever podcast you are listening to this platform on. We go across them all. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Digitise Diaries.